Hey, you remember when you said you wanted to do something other than the green screen?
I do.
Do you have any ideas?
I mean, I've got some, but I haven't worked them out yet. Why?
Well, I have an idea. I think you might like it.
Okay, what is it?
Let me show you. Okay, so the idea is to just sit here and have a conversation about fish.
I like it. It's kind of like almost like making a podcast.
Yeah, like just a laid back conversation talking about fish.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I like it. Let's do it. What are we going to talk about?
Well, the channel members have sent in a ton of questions talking about maintenance, and they're interested in, what we do with maintenance and what's the best way to, do maintenance on an aquarium. So I thought let's talk about that. It's a good one to start with.
I'm in. Let's go.
Alrighty. So the first question is, we've all heard of the guy and from the guy who hasn't done a water change for years. Can you share some clarification of why a balanced, well-planted, stocked, and seasoned tank might be able to do this, in contrast to the in process, less than balanced, tanks most of us seem to be keeping?
So my immediate response to that would be, what is it that's making the tank balanced? And there's a lot of factors that can contribute to that. It's not impossible to think that there is that tank out there that never has to be touched. Mm-hmm. It just runs on its own. But the reason why that's okay is because of the way the tank is set up. Does it have a lot of live plants in it that are going to help with, controlling nitrates and things like that? Is it a lowly stocked tank? A lowly, is that how you say it? Lowly? Is there not that many fish in it?
Yeah,
That's probably
right.
the better way of saying it. But all of that's going to contribute to it. Now, water, I don't care what circumstances you're in, water is always going to evaporate. And
That's true.
so I feel like a tank that's like that doesn't require a bunch of water changes and stuff like that, has enough in there to control the waste and all of that, nitrate control and all of that. But the fish keeper is putting water in to top it off when the water gets down, when it evaporates. You have to do that. Otherwise, eventually your tank's going to be empty after a while.
Exactly.
And to me, that's like in nature, that would be rain. It rains.
Yeah.
There's no water changes in a river or a lake. It's the water evaporates, it rains, and it provides more, or it comes from a stream or whatever it is. So, I've never had a tank like that, a tank that never has to be touched, because I've always kept, heavily stocked tanks or big fish, stuff like that. But it can be done. I mean, Lucas Bretz does this a lot. He has a lot of,
right.
I guess what you would call natural tanks that don't need a lot of maintenance. I don't know that I can explain it any better.
I think that's the perfect analogy. Rivers don't get water changes. The water, that is put back in there is from rain, and that's nature.
Yep.
And that makes perfect sense.
Yep. I mean, the fish don't only poop in aquariums. They poop in nature too.
Right.
And that
They
poop
do.
goes somewhere. It gets controlled somehow. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention on this is larger tanks, like the two you see in this video here, are going to balance easier because it's such a huge body.
Right.
The little amounts of waste and things like that are not going to affect a huge tank like this as much as they would a small little nano tank. And that's kind of the closest thing to nature, because you got a lake that's however many millions and millions of gallons. Some fish pooping in there is not going to
Fish
affect it
don't
as much.
only poop in those rivers and lakes. They also die. So that gives other fish something to eat, which sounds
Circle of life.
disgusting, but that is the way it is. So
It's the circle of life. And now you're welcome. You have that song stuck in your head, and it will be there for the rest of the day.
And I'm not suggesting that if a fish dies in your fish tank that you just leave it
no.
in there. No, get it out immediately.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, do you test your water before each water change? And how do you determine how much water needs to be changed?
You know, honestly, in the beginning, I did test the water regularly. You know, when I was a new fish keeper, trying to figure out, what I was doing right or wrong. And I did have you to help a lot, but
Thank you for mentioning that.
but I needed to figure it out on my own as well. So yes, I did. I checked the water parameters frequently in the very beginning. But as I became a more experienced fish keeper, I just kind of knew when it was, time to change the water, how much to change, and I didn't test unless something seemed off. And if you pay very close attention to your fish, you'll know if something's not right. And yes, it's good to, do those tests and check things because you want to prevent something from happening. And if you're on top of it and you see something's not right and you're able to fix it before something bad happens, that's really good. And, that goes along with being a new fish keeper and an experienced fish keeper. Like I said, you can kind of figure it out after a while.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add to that is I second the notion that you should be doing it when you're a new fish keeper because you don't fully understand what happens in the water just naturally. So testing the water is critical so that when there is a problem, you know that you need to react. But not only that, once you understand the way the water works, you should keep testing because as you're maintaining your tank, I mean, you have a lot of people out there that say, well, I do 50% water changes every single week, and that's like clockwork. I do it all the time. Mm-hmm. I used to be one of those people. I'm not that guy anymore. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, but that can be looked at as overkill, and you would know if it was overkill if you were testing regularly. Mm-hmm. Again, especially in the beginning. Like you said, eventually you're going to understand the way your specific tank with your filtration, with your size, with your amount of fish that you have, the amount you're feeding, you're going to understand how your tank behaves. You're going to understand that because I have this many fish, I don't have any live plants to help control nitrate, and I'm feeding as much as I do, my water is funky after a week and a half. So I need to do a water change every week and a half. And then continuing to test will tell you how much water you should be changing. So you get to that place where your water gets fouled up, your nitrates are at 100 parts per million or whatever, which that's bad. Don't let it go that high. But you're going to do your water change until it gets under 40. And so you look at that and you say, well, I did a 50% water change and my nitrates were just completely wiped out. Well, maybe you don't need to do as big a water change next time. Yep. And you can, as you're testing before and after each water change, this is what happens after this amount of time, and this is what happens when I do this much of a water change. And you can start to document all of those things, use an app, whatever it is that you want to do, and you can understand what effects your maintenance has on your water parameters, and then you can build a schedule and you can go from there. You might find out that you don't need to do water changes but once a month, and that's okay.
And it's funny because we have so many different kinds of tanks in our house that water changes aren't a specific day of the week because I have my sorority tanks that are heavily planted, so I don't have to do as much water changing in that tank, and the fish are small. But then in my discus tank, I need to do more water changes more often. I do less water. I take out less water, but I do it more often because I feed them more. I feed them more, they poop more, and I like to keep their water extremely clean. And not only that, they don't have any plants. It's just, it's like a black water tank. It has no plants whatsoever, just Indian almond leaves, catappa leaves, and driftwood. So in the sand, the substrate is sand with just a little bit of, pebbles or whatever. So I can see the poop sitting right on top. So I get it right away, where the sorority tank, again, heavily planted, and
Everything gets hidden.
yeah, and the poop, it just helps the plants right along.
Yep. The flip side of that is this tank here, similar to the discus tank. There's only one decoration in there, and it has no effect on the water parameters whatsoever. But that's that's 360 gallons. If you include the filtration, it's over 400 gallons of water. It takes a long time for a tank that size or 125 gallon to get fouled up. Even though we've got some heavy hitters in this tank back here, I don't have to do water changes in this tank but once a month. And people are going to hear that and go, oh, how dare he? But that's just a fact. I don't need to, because it doesn't require water changes more than once a month.
And that's very similar to myself. I have several 10-gallon tanks with one single beta in it. So changing the water every other week isn't a big deal. But if that was a 5-gallon tank, it would be every week.
Right.
So.
Yep. All depends on the tank size. It depends on what you have in the tank, what you're doing to the tank from a feeding and fertilizing and stuff like that standpoint, which is why it is so critical that you test regularly. But like you said in the beginning, eventually you're going to understand how your tank works, and you're not going to have to test anymore. You might want to still check every once in a while just to see what's going on, but you're going to know just by looking at it. You're going to know.
Exactly. Should you gravel vacuum all of the substrate every time you do a water change, or do you do a section with each water change?
That question is a lot more commonly asked than you might think. And you know what? I hate to kind of get repetitive here, but if you're doing exactly what we just talked about, if you're testing and you understand how your water is working, then you can kind of answer that question based on those results. I don't think it's necessary to vacuum every square inch, every single water change. But I think you should do at least half. And again, if you're doing half each time, let's say you're water changing every other week, and you're doing 50% of the gravel, and then the following water change you do the other half. If you're having a hard time with your ammonia or something like that, then you're not doing enough. You need to do maybe the whole thing every water change. So it's not required that you do 100% of the substrate, but it's also not going to hurt. It's all going to depend on what's going on in your water.
Well, I think it also depends on what kind of tank you have, what kind of substrate you have, if you even have substrate, because that tank behind you with the, the Oscars and stuff, of course you're going to end up siphoning the entire bottom because you see everything. And that's how my discus tank is. I'm going to siphon the, on top of the sand all the way through the entire 125. So the entire bottom is going to be siphoned because I'm going to see what's there. But for the sorority tank and any of my other Planet tanks, I do half because there's so much going on in there. I don't want to stir up too much ammonia or cause some kind of a spike and then my fish die. So I do parts, half over here or the other half over there, and I'm very cautious about what I lift up. If I lift up a rock, I'm going to immediately siphon everything that comes out from under there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we are agreeing way too much today, but no, it's true, because gravel, if you have just standard aquarium gravel, that's going to hide a lot.
A lot.
And so you can get away with only doing portions of the water changes. But yeah, most of our tanks are either sand, bare bottom, or a planted substrate, which you're not really going to gravel vac anyway. So yeah, I mean, so much of it depends on your situation. But if you're someone that you specifically asked gravel vacuum, so I'm assuming you have gravel. If you don't need to do it all, don't do it all. That's my answer. But you'll know when you're doing your tests whether you need to do it all or not.
But you should definitely do some every single time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You want to make sure you're getting some of that waste out of there every single time.
No question. How do you get the fish poop off of sand? You have a sand aquarium, so you
Yes,
can
I
answer
do.
this quite well. I'm struggling trying not to remove a whole lot of sand every time I vacuum.
It can be such a challenge, but I'm just so careful and just barely put the python down there and just I don't even have it touch the sand. I just have it kind of right above it, about an inch, and the poop just goes right up in it. So
Swirl it
it's
around a little bit.
patience. It takes patience, lots of patience. But no, I do not stick that thing down in the sand, because then it just goes through the python into the sink or wherever I'm letting it out at.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about. If you have sand substrates, I would definitely encourage you to not siphon your, whether you're using a python or just a long siphon hose or whatever it is you're using, don't siphon down a drain, because yeah, she makes that face for a reason. Inevitably, there will be granules of sand that are going to get stuck to the poop, especially if you have big fish in there. You'll find that when you're hovering your siphon hose over it, you'll see little, this sounds so weird, but you'll see little speckles in the poop that is sand. That's going to go down the drain. And I'm not going to try to act like I'm a professional plumber, but the way plumbing works, that sand is going to settle in what's called a trap in your plumbing system, and it's just going to pile up, and it can not only completely clog up your drains, but it can also completely defeat the purpose of that trap, and you are going to have serious plumbing issues in your house. So vacuum it outside, which is what I like to do, and that's what I do in here. It's easy because it's a garage, but or if you absolutely can't do that, you try the old dreaded bucket trick, because you do not want that sand going down into your drain.
I can't say how many times I've overflowed the sink because of that too. And then it ends up on the floor, and then it's all over the basement. And that's why it's nice to have a shop vac. So
Yeah, we have a big shop vac because of the woman sitting across the table from me. And me a couple times. But the other pointer, or the other trick that I would offer is, I wish I had one sitting here with me. If you take the larger hard plastic end of whatever siphon hose you're using, if you take that off, every siphon hose, you have the big vacuum portion, and then you have the hose which goes to your drain. If you just pop that off and just use the hose, you get a lot more pull through that, and it'll really pull the stuff off of the substrate. But you do have to be careful. It is very strong when you do that. It's a lot stronger than having that big hose on the end or that big attachment on the end. So you can pull a lot of sand out really fast. So be careful. But if you have a lot of really tricky spots, that'll help to just take that end off, and you'll be good to go.
You know what? I had no idea. I learned something new today as well.
How about that?
Wow. How important is it to match the water temperature when doing a water change?
It's important, but it's not. You don't want to use freezing water.
Right.
You also don't want to use boiling water. What I've always done, I've always done this, is I just get it by feel as close as possible. I don't pull out thermometers and all this kind of stuff. I just try to get it to touch as close as possible. But there are situations where using different temperature can do good things, like induce spawning and all kinds of stuff. There are so many fish, I'm not going to read a list, but there's so many fish out there that cool water changes, simulates rain. And I guess that's what it is. That's what I've heard. It simulates rain, and it cools the water down, and it gets them in the mood, and they'll spawn. And the interesting story, I hope you weren't about to tell this, You and I, when we had our hatchery in our garage, 127 aquariums, we were breeding 29 different African cichlids. We would find so many holding females on Mondays. Why? Because we did water changes on Sundays.
On Sundays.
And we used cool water because we had 127 tanks. Our water heater was not big enough to supply
Right.
warm water to all of them. So inevitably, a lot of the tanks would get cooler water, not freezing, but
Right.
cooler water, and it would just get them going. And we would come home from work
Oh
on
my
Monday,
gosh.
and there would just be what you
Tons.
would call mamas. There's mamas everywhere.
There's mamas all
and
over
that
the
was
place.
fun.
Yeah, and even now, even though we don't have as many larger tanks like that, I still do that. I would rather add water that's slightly under the temperature in the aquarium already than something warmer. I just don't see the benefit of doing that because, like you were saying, a lot of fish, they're used to that in nature, not
They
the fish
appreciate
we
a little
have.
cool off.
Yeah, of course they're not used to it if they're bred and raised in an aquarium, but to me it would be the same effect.
Absolutely, yeah. I do know a lot of people though that will pull out the thermometers and get it absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
It's just not all that necessary. I mean,
Well, I do that for my beta tanks, my little beta tanks for the website. When I get the water from the tap and I, put all the chemicals in that I need to, whatever, I put those in the fish room so they reach room temperature before I do any kind of water changes for the betas.
and
So-
room temperature is 86 degrees, by the way.
No, it's 81.
81 degrees.
Yeah, you're 5 degrees off.
Sorry. But yeah, and that's particularly important that you bring that up because a very small aquarium, if you're doing a 50% water change and you use really cold water, that's going to have a massive effect on the overall temperature
Right.
in that tank because it's so small.
Yeah.
But a big giant tank like this, not as much.
And they don't have heaters in them, so I
The whole
have
room
to
is heated.
I have to keep it room temperature for them.
Yep. Yeah, so if you're breeding, give them a little cooler. Don't freeze them. Give it a little cooler
Hey,
water. And if you're
like that.
if you're just trying to keep things straight, just to touch. That's fine.
Yeah. How to add prime or safe to the tank? Should it be pre-mixed in water or just dumped in the tank? I add Seachem Excel and Flourish. Can I mix them with my Seachem Discus Trace and add all three at once? Or should I add one at a time spaced out? Love the channel.
Yeah, and we love Nicole too. We just still don't know how to say her last name. But so here's the thing. I don't think there's any particular rule as to how you have to do this. In fact, I know you don't I know there's no rule because I've been doing it a way that is probably not what the rule book says for decades, and it's worked out fine, which is just adding it while I'm filling the tanks up. I do all of my siphoning. I take the Python, reverse it, and start filling the tank back up again, and then I pour the water conditioners in. And what I do is I just pour it into the stream from the
Yes,
hose. I feel like
that's
that.
what I do.
I don't know if that makes a huge difference, but I feel like that disperses it faster if we do it that way. So that's how I do it. I think in a perfect world, we would all have giant vessels that we can store water in, and we can treat it, and we could heat it to temperature, and we could have it all perfectly ready to put into the tanks. But let's be realistic. Not many of us have the ability to do that. So you do the best you can. You put it in while you're filling the tank up, and it's fine. As far as
Right.
mixing all of the things, yeah, why not? You can mix them all together and put them in there. It's no big deal.
I mean, I definitely add my prime immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely, when I'm putting the water in, there's no doubt about that. But as far as like any kind of plant fertilizer, I don't do that at the same time. I usually do it the next day, but that's just me. I don't think there's a problem if you do it either way, but I just do it. I do it the next day.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. But I'm just
Yeah.
I don't think you have to do it that way.
Yeah.
You can do it as long as you get it in there, then you're fine. The water for our house is from a well. No chlorine or chloramine in our tap water. Do I need to use Prime or the equivalent on regular water changes?
I still would use Prime. I think it's important because there are things in your well water that you may not be aware of. And of course, unless you're doing, you should be testing. Anyways, but I definitely would still use Prime or some kind of water conditioner, even with well water, because you can never be too safe.
Well, and a lot of water, you have to understand your water's coming from a natural source. That doesn't mean it's perfect.
Right.
Rainwater isn't always perfect. It picks up things as it's falling from the sky. It's probably as close to perfect as you're going to get, but
Right.
there can be heavy metals. There can be nitrates in well water. There can be ammonia in well water. And so, yeah, I mean, it does help to do that. Plus, some water conditioners like Guard and Stress Coat have additives in it to help slime coat and things like that. So,
Right.
You might as well. I guess the easiest way to wrap it up is water conditioners are not just for chlorine and chloramine. They're for other things too. And so, even though your water doesn't have chlorine or chloramine in it, it's probably still a good idea to help it out
Yeah.
a little bit. And it helps control ammonia and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, might as well use it. And I can tell you
Exactly.
where exactly you can buy it. Selfish plug, keepfishkeeping.com, of course. That's
Right.
where you can buy Prime or Fritz Complete. It's essentially the same product. We believe 100% in both of them. They're there for you, ready to go.
Exactly.
So that's that. That's our first one. That was
Wow,
fun.
That was a lot of fun.
I love your idea here, and I
Thank
hope
you.
the video doesn't turn out to be 3 hours long, but
Well,
it was fun either way.
no, I think I really like just having a laid back conversation and just go with the flow. It's so much more fun.
I agree.
And
So
you get the all natural, non edited version instead
it'll
of,
be edited, but unscripted.
Yeah, exactly, unscripted.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Let us know in the comments section what you think about this format. I enjoy it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And to prevent the video from being 3 hours long, let's go ahead and wrap it up
All
here.
right.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on another one just like this next week.